Welcome to Amazing Americans, your source for authentic stories of inspiration, where we highlight motivating and amazing achievements by your fellow Americans. Now, here's your host of Amazing Americans, Kate Delaney.
You know that fantasy that some people have that I'm going to sail around the world, I'm going to get a boat, I'm going to learn how to do it. And of course, it never comes true because it's so hard to be able to do that, to have the reps, to have the courage that it takes to be able to do that, to be able to make that happen. And it takes a lifetime often for people to even have a shot at doing that. Wait till you meet Randy Tisch and where he started and things that happened to him along the way. And his 3,100 miles at sea, incredible. The things that he encountered and what he and his wife were able to do, it just absolutely blows me away. And some of the things that he's overcome for sure. Randy, thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about, first of all, your interest in the sea, because does it go all the way back to when you decided you were going to go into the Navy?
Yeah, it sure did. I went back to basically the first time I can remember anything. Always as a kid, I really disliked boats and the idea of them and that sort of thing. But my parents didn't have a boat, never got one, and didn't share my interest. So it took until I was about 18 when my father introduced me to the U.S. Navy. That's when I, as opposed to going to college, I started off in the military.
And what's so crazy is in the Navy, you were trained on radar, you were trained on, you were a cryptographic technician, you went on a seaplane tender. That was what your job was, which is so fascinating itself. You made 4 crossings of the Pacific, including months on station in Vietnam. Tell us what that life was like.
Well, I really liked it. In fact, one of the more interesting things, we were tied up in San Diego at what at the time was called the Quay Wall, with big carriers tied up. But across from us was a heavy cruiser called the St. Paul, USS St. Paul. And while I was on that dock, 2 things happened. First of all, they were asking for volunteers to go to Vietnam. My father talked me out of doing that. So I went to Vietnam on that ship rather than, individually. But across from us was the St. Paul, a huge, heavy cruiser. And they filmed the movie In Harm's Way on that cruiser while we were tied up there. So we got to see John Wayne and Kirk Douglas and all the other stars screwing around on there, make-believing that they were in the Navy during World War II. But anyway, the Navy was great. I really enjoyed the time on there, enjoyed being on the ship and the men and everything, as well as being on station in Vietnam. We were on station. In fact, we were featured in Time magazine as a ship that had been on station a long time. And we did shore bombardment as well as 10 seaplanes.
Wow. And, and I think a lot of people don't understand what that was like. You're painting that picture for us. Certainly you were in harm's way. There were moments when you're at harm's way, obviously, and you learned the things that you had to do, obviously. Then you're deployed, so to speak, and you get really close, don't you, when you're on a seaplane with the guys that you're there with?
Yeah, you sure do. In fact, Thanksgiving's coming up here, and I remember a Thanksgiving I spent in Cameron Bay. We were at anchor there attending a seaplane squadron, and at the time, there was a radio broadcast from Hanoi who was a woman called Hanoi Hannah, sort of like Tokyo Rose of World War II. But she named our ship, said they were going to blow it up and all of that sort of thing, and wished us a happy Thanksgiving at the bottom of the bay. So we increased our surveillance. One of the things I did was when I was on watch, I had to walk around the perimeter of the ship and drop hand grenades every 15 minutes off the side of the ship as a way to deter frogmen from, putting a bomb on the side of the hull. So that was Thanksgiving, and I suppose that was about 1964.
Wow. Just thinking about that, that's just wild. And it's interesting. And thank you for your service. You get out of the Navy, and then you go on another couple of wild adventures, including you had a job at a GM tech center, but this was a job that led to you being part of designing tiles, space tiles for the Apollo. Dive
Yeah,
into
the Apollo.
that.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, sure happenstance, serendipitous. I wound up working for the Material and Structures Lab at General Motors, and they had these huge guns. They're like a gun on a ship. They're designed to create impact against one plate impacts another, and they use it for, among other things, to test paint chips to see if they can improve the chemistry of paint to keep rocks from damaging your car. But they also had a contract with NASA to develop the space tiles for the Apollo mission, which we did. And of course, I had a tiny little part in it, nothing of substance. I was just a kid. But anyway, it was interesting to be part of all that and to be with those scientists.
And so for you as a 23-year-old and working with these scientists, basically, you watched Neil Armstrong, right, huddled around a TV.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And he would be getting back by virtue of the work these guys did to create those space tiles.
Yeah. And as exciting as that was, you realize you have to move on to something else. Plus you had college in your mind. So there was the University of Michigan that was beckoning you. And you go on that journey and you end up selling life insurance. And I want everyone to hear this, door to door. You have to have a personality, door to door now. I don't know how that would work, but you had to really build it up, didn't you?
Yeah, I sure did. I didn't know really anybody to sell insurance to. I did learn over the course of time that you tend to make similar amounts of money to the income of the people that you serve. So if you're going to go door to door, chances are you're not going to make a big income. So I learned over time that I needed to learn tax law and accounting and so forth so that I could deal with businesses and help the owners of smaller businesses, not General Motors or anything like that, but small tool and die companies and printing companies and so forth, help their owners understand that because their businesses are illiquid, if they die or become disabled, they really aren't going to have any money, or their family's not going to have any money because the business won't survive them. So that is sort of the nature of what I did for quite a long time. And part of that was designing retirement plans, pension plans, and all that. So you kind of get a sense that somebody who's ambitious in that field can really go quite a long way from tax planning and so on and so forth. But that industry, like all industries, goes through changes, and the changes that it went through in the 80s were not really beneficial to me. So I gradually, I hired people. Actually, I was doing quite well. I hired people to work for me who could manage money and who know more than I did. In fact, because I'm here in Ann Arbor, I could hire PhD candidates or PhDs themselves. As a matter of fact, they cost less than hiring my very capable office manager. But that's how I got into the investment management business. And in the 80s, I started that. And that became the basis of my career. It was the investment management business.
When we return with our special guest, Randy Tisch, more about taking that business public, being able to sell it, and being really an early disruptor, how that affected the market, how it led to what he was ultimately able to do by achieving his dream of getting a boat and taking it on a first run from Alaska to Newfoundland and then selling it and getting an even bigger boat. What he learned about business and how he applied that to ultimately the seas in navigating fuel and navigating the things that you have to do in figuring out when you chart a course to go 3,000 miles, what it takes to actually get to that destination. That's coming up on the flip side.
Stay tuned to Amazing Americans. This is Amazing Americans with Kate Delaney.
And we're jumping back with our guest this week, Randy Tisch. We've been talking about your business, Randy, and it's interesting because really you were kind of a renegade. Tell us about how the business really ran.
My business was predicated on disrupting the field, if you will. That would be a current terminology. I decided that the commission business was really antithetical to what I wanted to do. So I set up a fee-for-service business, which today is called a fiduciary management business. And that was sort of the door opener for me into the managing pension funds and so forth. And of course, a larger class of client, because you need to have a larger portfolio to afford a fiduciary manager. So anyway, that's how I got started. But what I understood early on is that if I could turn my business, my concept of business, into a system, that is to have procedures and software as time went on and so forth, that it was a replicable system, that somebody might buy it from me. And in fact, a large public company bought the business. And their purchase was predicated on being able to take my systems both for managing clientele as well as for selecting securities. In other words, the whole operation, portfolio management, as well as prospect management. They wanted to apply it on a national scale. So that worked out for me. They bought my business and they kept all my clients and kept, when you're in a business like that, your clients have to approve the sale. So you have to get every single one of your clients to sign a contract saying you're leaving and I approve who's buying your business. And so I managed to do that, and I had over 500 clients. So they all said yes, which was really nice. And anyway, so once the business was sold, I stayed with them a year, and all my employees still, in fact, business is still there, and the employees are still there. That gave me enough cash to be able to buy the kind of boat that I wanted. Although sailing across the Pacific or sailing anywhere doesn't require a multi-million-dollar boat, it can be done with a smaller boat as well. But in my case, I wanted a particular type of boat.
And the whole love of boating, though, your wife, Rebecca, was an ophthalmologist, and she was a resident, in fact, at the University of Michigan's medical school. And you married, you start your family, you both love water sports and adventure and boating. So all of that was also growing in your personal life. And you started by, navigating the Great Lakes. And as you said to me, people, when you think the word lake, you think of something different than when you think you're crossing the Pacific. But it actually can be pretty challenging on the Great Lakes, right?
Well, they have some of the biggest ships in the world to sail the Great Lakes. The big lake freighters are 1,000 feet plus today, and occasionally one of them sinks because of the bad storms. So there's nothing, these lakes are nothing to sneeze at. They're inland seas for sure.
Yeah.
But that's how we got started. It's a wonderful boating season here. It's on fresh water, so we don't encounter some of the problems you do with saltwater from rust and that sort of thing. It's just, in some respects, mechanically, it's a little simpler here than it is in the ocean. But as far as seamanship, it's just about the same, and same equipment, same awareness, everything else.
So tell us about the boat and deciding you're going to do this, the crossing the Pacific, and your wife's on board. The two of you are both into this and have, like I said, have definitely been living a boating lifestyle in a sense. How do you prepare for that? Tell us about the boat and how you prepare for it.
Well, for years I started dreaming about it. My wife and I both agreed we had so much fun on the Great Lakes with our boat that we wanted to live that again, except this time on the ocean. I started reading about it. There were magazines called the Trawler magazine, for example, which people would write articles on what they were doing. And eventually when the internet got going, we were listening to reading people's accounts of their travels on boats, between places like Venezuela and Colombia and that sort of thing. So it fed a hunger and an interest and a curiosity to do it. And then I called up a company. The name of the company is Nordhaven. It's out of Dana Point in California. And I made an appointment to go out there 1 year and look at their boats. And I was quite impressed, but the boats were too small for me. A couple of years later, they redesigned their boats, and I went out and looked again. And they were perfect. It was a perfect size boat for me. And I called up my wife, Rebecca, and I said, I think this is great. She said, well, go ahead and buy it. She didn't even look at it. But they are splendid. She'd been out there once before. They're absolutely magnificent boats. And the thing that characterizes them, there used to be, I think I've forgotten his name, a runner, and he kept talking about LSD, long, slow distance. You can run a long way if you don't run very fast. And that's the same thing with a boat. If you go slow enough and you have an efficient engine, you can go a long way with the amount of fuel that thing can carry, which is a limitation. So most of these boats that you see, the big white boats, the big white plastic boats that you see in most harbors around the country, those things are great. They go very fast. But they don't carry enough fuel to go more than about 200 miles. So, and most of them, because of the fact that they're rather flimsy, that is to say very thin hulls and very lightweight, they're not certified to go more than about 50 miles off the coast. So what I needed was the Abrams tank of the boat world. I needed a boat that was strong enough to withstand the weather that you might encounter out in the ocean. And I needed a boat with enough fuel carrying capacity, given its engine size, that it could make a long enough range. So these boats that Nordhaven builds, by and large, can do over 3,000 miles range on a tank of gas. And they travel about 8 knots, depending on the model. So 8 knots is close to 10 miles an hour, a little less. But they have enough fuel to go about 3,000 miles. And of course, when they say 3,000 miles, they mean 3,000 miles without turning on a generator. Because a generator, that's a little caveat that you learn after you get one. It's not that they're hiding anything, it's just I didn't realize it. But anyway, so we bought one, and we traveled ultimately from Alaska to Newfoundland, which is a long ways. And so we went through North America, and then through Mexico and El Salvador and Costa Rica and all of that. And then through the Panama Canal and across to Jamaica, and then up through Cuba and the Bahamas and into Florida. And eventually from there up to Rhode Island, where we sold that boat. And meantime, had ordered another one, and it was on its way to Fort Lauderdale. So we came back there and got it ready for sea, and then took it up to Newfoundland, sort of shakedown cruise, and then back down to Florida, fill her up with gas, put some food on it, and take off for New Zealand.
When we return with our guest, Randy Tisch, what was it like navigating an unexpected storm with 30-foot waves?
Stay inspired. Stay tuned to Amazing Americans. You're listening to Amazing Americans with Kate Delaney.
This week we're talking to Randy Tisch on the show. And Randy, we've been talking about pursuing that dream of sailing all over the place, really. In fact, racking up the miles. What did you learn about boating that you didn't know?
Well, I used to think that boating required knowledge of the sea and knowledge of plotting and charting and all that sort of thing, which it does. But an equal amount of knowledge is required just to keep the doggone things going. Whether it's a sailboat or a motor yacht like the one I had, you really have to know how to deal with the mechanics and all of the equipment. And they're very fragile in some ways. Small things can go bad, like, well, I won't get into it all, but Even little things can be a problem. And then you have to learn not just seamanship, but how to tie the things up properly in a storm, and just how to anchor it, which is called ground tackle, how to use that sort of thing. So it just takes time and a lot of help from other people who would gladly teach you how to do this sort of thing.
Yeah, and when you're out there, you got to plan for a shipwreck. You got to plan for what happens if we're stranded. And because so often, right, you look out to the horizon and you're the only boat out there.
Well, in the book, Crossing the Wild Pacific, which is what we're talking about, it's my captain's log of how I planned the cruise across the Pacific and what I did to anticipate problems that we might have. So we start with things like what are the single points of failure that I need to anticipate and then address. For example, one that might not be obvious is, what if the anchor windlass, that's the motor that brings the anchor off the ground when it's deployed off the bottom of the ocean, what if that stops working? How do I get this 300-pound anchor and 1,600 pounds of chain off the bottom of the ocean if I don't have a motor to pull it up? So I had to anticipate that. And that's a serious problem. It happened to us one time when we were in Jamaica, and I couldn't get the anchor up. And wow, that really can be a problem because there are other boats around and you could swing into them or any other, just not getting it up is a big deal. So
yeah.
That's just one problem. I mean, there are thousands, not thousands, but there are lots of problems that you need to anticipate. Luckily, I never had to use, I don't think, hardly any of the sort of fail-safe plans that I had in mind. We just didn't run into those sorts of problems, although we did have a lot of trouble with the hydraulic system on that particular boat. It was failing all the time, and it was supposed to be a fail-safe system. So you really, a person needs to anticipate these things.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating, your book, because you take us through exactly what it's like, where you went, the map, the whole thing. And one of the things you say, if we go back to that first time, you're talking about the anchor. The anchor and the chain weigh about 1,200 pounds. So that's not a small deal. And that you only had one hydraulic windlass, which can be unreliable, because what happens, for all kinds of things can happen when you're cruising and unexpectedly something strands you and the wind is blowing you out. And you talk about this to sea.
That's right. I think what you're referring to is when I had a tender. A tender is just a small boat that you have on your big boat so that you can get ashore when you're anchored. And those tenders have one engine on them. This one was a Yamaha. It was brand new.
Yeah.
And I was out in that thing in Mexico, and all of a sudden the motor wouldn't work. It stopped working, and turns out that it was a flaw. They replaced the engine, actually. But that taught me, and if the wind had continued blowing, I'd have to be riding that thing out into the ocean. I mean, it could have been in Japan. And there's nobody down there in Mexico where we were, and the engine failed and it was blowing me out to sea. How did I address that point of failure? Well, I bought a small electric motor and that would run off the battery that started the main motor. And at least that small electric motor would push me back, toward the shore. So,
Right. Wow.
Anyway.
Wow. And it's incredible the places that you were able to, the places that you landed, the places where you went. I mean, even the Bahamas, you talk about how you have the gorgeous aqua blue water and the sand and the beautiful palm trees. And one of the pictures that you have in the book, and talk about the movie Thunderball being filmed there where you were, you have the pigs. You have the pigs that are swimming, right? And people have heard about it, but I think they don't think it's true, but it is.
And they drink beer too. You can just hand them the can and they'll open it for themselves.
Right. Crazy, right? Yeah. And I mean, so that's a good experience. That's an interesting experience. And your book is flooded with incredible pictures. But you also have the experience that so many people put on their list, and it's not easy to pull it off, but the Galapagos Islands, and you stayed there for 3 weeks. What was that like?
That was fabulous. It was, there's so many interesting things. The islands themselves, of course, are full of animals who are not afraid of human beings. So you can approach, whether it's a blue-footed booby or a seal or anything else, the animals just are unafraid. And we walked through one area which was a habitat for frigate birds, and the pictures of them in the book. Frigate birds, the males have this pouch under their beak that they blow up into a huge red ball. And the size of the ball is attractive, depending on the size of it, is attractive to the female. So they fly around with this ball hanging out of their face and looking for females that might want them to join them in the nest. So that was really interesting. But these animals just sit there and they sit in the nest, and they don't care whether you walk by. The seals are all over the place, and just you have to step over them. I mean, it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, because they're not hunted, they're not prey, so they approach people differently, right?
Right. Even the sea animals, if you dive there, which we did, even the manta rays and the rest of them are very tame by comparison to what you'll find in other places.
Yeah.
One of the things about the Galapagos, I think I mentioned it, maybe talked to you about it before. When you come into the Galapagos, they're very fastidious about your boat. They send a diver down and look at the bottom. They check certifications and all kinds of things, health certifications. They send somebody on to look at your tanks and make sure you have a black water tank, and they make you turn it off so it won't dump over the side, and so on and so forth. After we went through this rigorous exam, which took the better part of one day, we went ashore, and I smelled this foul stench. Turns out that the city right there, San Antonio, it dumps all its sewer right into the bay anyway.
Oh.
I mean, you can't make the stuff up unless you have to go there and see it.
You have to go there and see it. And you saw so many places. I mean, it would take us hours to talk about it, but New Zealand and then also encountering a typhoon. What happened when that hits?
Well, that was very exciting. We had, people, about the first question people asked me is, did you get any bad storms? Well, we got into a terrible storm. We had sustained winds over 50 miles an hour and gusts up over 65 miles an hour. And the waves were around 30 feet. And so I decided that we needed to turn around so that I was going toward New Zealand. The issue there is, if the sun is going down and the wind's high, waves are not symmetrical, so they're not even. There's often 3 or 4 of them in one grouping, and then it'll be relatively calm, not calm, but relatively calm for a few seconds, and then there'll be a new set of waves. So I waited. The sun was going down. I needed to make a decision right away. So I waited for what I thought was a decent chance, and I turned the wheel and used the stern and bow thruster and flipped this boat sideways and around, did 180 degrees in 2 seconds, literally. And once we got the stern to the waves, stern to, the whole ride of the boat was just so much more tolerable. The boat ran very well, didn't have any problems going in that direction. So we felt a lot more comfortable. And as we were going toward New Zealand, the storm was blowing out to sea, so it gradually got better for us.
When we continue our journey here on the show with Randy Tisch, navigating the tough world of cancer.
More Amazing Americans in a moment. This is Amazing Americans with Kate Delaney.
We're continuing our conversation with our guest, Randy Tisch. Randy, you've just told us about these incredible adventures that you've had, and then suddenly you get a terrible curveball, and it all starts when you're just doing your regular routines, including using the restroom, and you discover that something isn't right. What happens next?
Well, my wife was a surgeon, so she knew right away what it was. So we went to the hospital there in Auckland, and the next day we had a plane back to Ann Arbor, and the day after that I was in a surgeon's office here, and they did their tests, and so I started on a chemo but the chemo didn't work. So it meant, and this took 6 months or more. Meantime, we flew back to Fiji and met the boat in Fiji. I had a captain bring it up. And so we spent 6 weeks in Fiji while I was waiting for this medicine to work. Then we flew back to Michigan, and a guy called me up. He said, "You got to have this thing out. It's got to come out. I've got time on Friday afternoon." I think this was Wednesday night. I said, "I can't deal with this. I got to have more time. I can't have that organ removed. I've got to think about it." So I put it off a week, and then I had it done. And that leads to a whole nother part of the story, which is I had to hire people to bring that boat back to the United States. They turned out to be incompetent and actually dangerous, and they wound up in jail.
Wow.
I had to hire a second crew to fly to Hawaii and get the boat and bring it back to Los Angeles. So we finally got it back here. Meantime, I had been going through surgery. I was not able to deal with any of this stuff, really. It's amazing. Amazing we got it all done and didn't lose the boat. But anyway, we got it tied up in L.A., and then after a few months, I was able to go out there and with Rebecca and clean the boat up and take it down to Ensenada in order to avoid Los Angeles taxes. Boy, their taxes are steep out there.
Sure.
Nobody leaves a boat of any value in California if they can avoid it.
Right.
So anyway, we took it down there. Eventually, we sold it because I really didn't think that I could maintain the medical requirements that had befallen me. As it turns out, I've lived through it, and I can go do it again, but now I'm getting older. So I don't know. Not sure. I think my time has passed.
But what a wild adventure, and still enjoying the sea. And there's one thing you left out that I think people would find fascinating, because here you are. I mean, this is serious stuff. You're fighting for your life, even though you have great people around you. I mean, that really is it, because you never know. And you're getting these calls about the boat, and you got to trust that you can get the boat to where it needs to go. And it turns out that the crew went after the captain, right? Didn't they beat him up? And wasn't that part of the whole thing of them ending up in jail?
Yeah, the fellow that I hired, I'd met him when the boat was in the yard in outside of Auckland, and a very capable guy. And so when I found out I had this problem and I needed to get the boat from Fiji to Hawaii, or ultimately to L.A., he said that, yep, he would try to get a crew, and he got 4 guys with him that had worked on oil rigs. All of them had their own captain's license, so these were experienced people. And I thought this was great, and it was okay. It was fine. They got it to into Honolulu, and the customs agents called me, and we went through all the stuff to get these New Zealanders into Hawaii, and that was all fine. But on that boat, we had 2 safes. One was a hidden safe, and the other was a little more obvious up on the pilot house. And the idea was, if you're boarded by pirates, you keep a small amount of money in the more accessible safe, but the one that's deeply hidden is where you keep your real money. So coming across the Pacific, we kept about $50,000 in case we needed to buy fuel someplace. We needed to use cash. And up on the bridge, we kept about $2,500. So the crew, none of the crew, any of my crew ever knew anything about the safe, the deep safe, but my bosun mate knew about the upper safe that had $2,500 in it. Anyway, when they got to Hawaii, I had to tell the customs people that I had more than $10,000. And so anyway, confidentially, I gave the guy the combination to these safes, and he went in and he said, yep, in your one safe, you've got the money that you told me you'd have, but in the upper safe, the $2,500, that's gone. So somebody stole that $2,500.
Wow.
It really annoyed me after all of that time. But anyway, those guys got there, and after the customs let them ashore and they tied the boat up and all that, these guys decided to go out to dinner. Apparently they came back, and they were all drunk, and they were drinking the booze on the boat, which was, of course, not allowed under our contract. And they got so irritated with the captain because he kept making them keep their feet off the furniture and treat the boat like a yacht, not a drilling rig. These guys just beat the living hell out of him, to the point that he had to be hospitalized. It took him more than a year to recover from the beating he got.
Wow.
And two of these guys tried to escape, and they were eventually picked up by the police and deported. The police from New Zealand flew to Honolulu to pick them up. Those guys may still be in jail. And the one remaining guy was wandering around the docks, drunk as hell. And that's how the harbor master in Honolulu learned about this. And anyway, he called me up and he said, "Your boat's full of blood." He said, "We've called the medics to get your captain. We've got the police here," and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, that all was a part of somebody, I guess, my adventure. But he didn't want to keep the boat in Honolulu too long because the fee to tie the boat up there was about $900 a day.
Wow.
So that's a lot of money, you know?
Yeah, that is a lot.
I got a hold of my friends at Nordhaven, and one of their captains and his brother and father-in-law flew, we paid for them to fly over to Honolulu. And within 2 days, we had a crew on board, and they filled it up with diesel fuel, and off they went to bring it from Honolulu to Los Angeles.
Wow.
And the problem was that was November, and you can look on your weather charts now and see that November in the North Pacific is nowhere you want to be. There's a lot of big storms out there.
Right, a lot of bad storms. Wow. So a lot of good things happened though for you, because you did get it there. Were able to get it, go to LA, get a 10 Sonata, do what you had to do, and just enjoy what happened. And your book is so wonderful. I would encourage anyone to get it, because you just read it and makes you want to go and do the journey too. Crossing the wild Pacific, captain's log of the yacht Argo. What do you hope people take away from hearing your story in this conversation with me, and even getting your book?
Well, I hope they just enjoy it. It's just fun. It's just a fun story. There are a few observations that are maybe more meaningful, just about how the planet is being overtaken by our own technology, particularly as it relates to fishing, and how serious this can be, and the deleterious effects that some of these countries, in particular China, have on these small islands. They're managed to buy the fishing rights from the islands. They build a canning factory. Then they bring their Chinese workers over, and the local fishermen are now out, can't get a license to fish because that's part of the treaty. And the women that used to work in the factories turn out to be prostitutes for the Chinese workers because they can't make any money. So the whole thing, it's just surprising. This happens to more than one place 3 or 4 places that I was at. And so these sorts of things occur, but it's, part of travel is to learn what happens to people and how they're living their lives, how they're solving the common problems we all have in being alive, how they raise their children, how they govern themselves in their societies, and how they pay their way in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's what I think. It's, you open your mind to these different things that happen in these encounters, and you certainly did that, and you take us on that journey with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Really had a very nice time. Thank you.
Wasn't it Dr. Seuss who said, "Oh, the places we'll go"? What an exciting journey with Randy Tisch, and how he got through some of his own personal hurdles. Coming up next week, another inspiring story here on the show. I'm Kate Delaney. Until then, my friends.
Thank you for joining